Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today, we have invited Dr. Beatrice Chestnut and Uranio Paes, two, I think they're world-class Enneagram experts. That's how I define them, and I think they are Enneagram experts in their own right. Welcome, guys, to the program today. We're glad to have you here.
It's great to be with you.
Yeah, very happy to be with you guys.
So we've invited you back to the podcast because we have been working together on a lot of different projects. We're getting closer and closer in our work all the time. We've come to some of your workshops, you've come to some of our workshops, and this collaboration, I think, is, I don't know, it's just like it's slowly emerging a lot of really fantastic content that I think is going to be something quite exciting. But as we were going through some of the programs that we've taken from you and some of the work that we've done together, we realized that the special magic of the Enneagram, and I think maybe we've talked about this on a previous episode, but one of the things for me in particular that's really magical is that while Myers-Briggs is a tool that can be used for ego work, the Enneagram is a tool that is designed for ego work. But the only way to really get to that place is to identify and accurately identify some of the behaviors that are coming up, that are manifesting based on your Enneagram type. So it's hard to do that, though, until you start to understand how the behaviors you're bringing to the world that sort of alchemically, interact with the world itself and the environment, there are certain obstacles that come up over and over and over. So what we wanted to do here was to set up a 3-part series to focus on each of what's called the centers of intelligence and talk a little bit about the obstacles that people face within each of these centers to get a better diagnostic of what's going on for each individual, maybe help identify one's own Enneagram type if a person, if the listener is new to the system, and just see if there's something that truly resonates, something that really strikes you individually is like, yeah, I think that is something that's going on for me.
Yeah, two things. One, we're not going to be able to go into every single nuance of obstacle for every single type. We're going to group it by those centers of intelligence, and we'll have to do this over a series of podcasts because we can't do it all in one show. Number two, and I'll just ask you, Beatrice, would you be willing to just give us a quick, quote-unquote elevator pitch or definition of what is the Enneagram? Maybe there's somebody new listening that's not as familiar with it, or they've heard it around in the different type circles, but we need a real good starting place of what are we actually talking about when we're talking about this system that is the Enneagram.
So the Enneagram is a 9-pointed star inscribed in a circle. So it's a diagram and it's a symbol. And the symbol derives from ancient wisdom teachings, ancient philosophy. And so it's very deep, but in the way we'll be talking about it, the symbol is a framework for a system of 9 interconnected personality types. And when you find which one of these types describes your particular personality style, you gain access to a lot of insight into yourself, and it almost acts as a guide for self-observation and self-understanding so that you can learn more about your personality, which is really what you are not, so you can move beyond it and see how it can be made up of self-limiting patterns that once you see more consciously, you can grow through realizing that you are much more than that. So you understand your personality and its patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving so that you can reach more of your full potential.
So that phrase, you can see what you're not, is that the element that helps sort of tackle the ego? Because we're sort of trapped, our self-definitions and our egos are trapped in these patterns of behavior and these self-limiting beliefs. One of the things about understanding your Enneagram type is to observe that and go, I don't need to be trapped by that. That's not what I am. Is that accurate?
Exactly. The personality or the ego, and we use those terms interchangeably, is really that part of you that develops to interface with the outside world. And so by definition, it's defensive or adaptive, and it represents a kind of default mode. It starts early on, but by the time we reach adulthood, it's kind of entrenched because the patterns of adaptation are so familiar to us that we don't even question them. But the Enneagram shines a light on what those patterns are, both conscious and unconscious, so that by making them more conscious and being more aware of the things we do, and especially the way we tend to do the same things over and over again, we can develop a wider range of strategies and strengths through which to interact in the world.
So then the obstacles arise from these adaptive behaviors. So hearing a good diagnostic of some of the challenges or obstacles that people in each of these centers of intelligence, and we'll explain what that is in a moment, but the obstacles are actually effectively emergence from these adaptive behaviors.
Correct. But what I think is wonderful also about the Enneagram, Antonia, is that the obstacles are really the core thing that people need to work on. So the Enneagram has this quality of going to the very core of the problem. Many times it's not only a behavioral thing, it's a motivational thing. And many times it speaks to unconscious material. And then there are paths of evolution every time. So it's much more a self-development system than a simple self-knowledge system.
You talk about 9 types, and we know that each of there's basically 3 centers. There's 3 types in each of these centers. And can you orientate us to what these 3 centers of intelligence are?
Yes, the 3 centers of intelligence are the head, the heart, and the body. And so the Enneagram framework sees us humans not as just having one center of intelligence. And in the West, we tend to think of our head as the center, the only center of intelligence. This is a different kind of model that sees these 3 centers as equally important in our functioning. The head center thinks and it analyzes. The heart center is the basis of emotions and relating to others, focusing a lot on relating to others through empathy, affection, mutual understanding. And the body center is the center of instinctual intelligence, or going into action or not going into action. It's a kind of gut knowing or kinesthetic intelligence. And the idea is that all 3 of these centers are ways we process information from the outside world. They're all really important and they operate in an interconnected way. However, when we're in personality, when we're identified with our personality, we are by definition out of balance because we're at a lower level of consciousness than we're fully capable of. And so part of that being out of balance in the personality and having a more limited perspective on life than we could have once we learn and grow and become more aware and conscious is that we each favor one of these centers. We each live more from one of these centers than the other 2. So 2s, 3s, and 4s live more from the heart center. 5s, 6s, and 7s live more from the head center. And 8s, 9s, and 1s live more from or kind of based more in the body center. And understanding which center you're in or based in can be tricky. And it's hard to actually discern that because a lot of us think we're in the head, even if we're not, for one thing. But it's really important because once you identify your type and identify which center you prioritize or you unconsciously live more from, that gives you a lot of interesting information in and of itself. For instance, the obstacles that we're going to talk about, but also ways of understanding yourself, working with yourself, practices to do, ways of creating more balance once you know how exactly you're out of balance.
Thank you for that. Let's dive into that body center. So this is going to be 8s, 9s, and 1s in the Enneagram system. And my guess is that you're going to talk about some of the commonalities between the obstacles that these 3 types might face as part of this center.
Yes, so body types, Joel, are more based on sensations as a primary filter of perception of reality. And what this means is that they smell something happening, or they need to do things so that they learn, which means touching. And so all those five senses are really, really important, not only in some activities, but they use that to truly know all they want to do in life. And as body types, they have some excellent qualities like commitment, responsibility, order, honor, things that come actually from the belly. Because when we say body types, we are actually saying that the most of the energy for those people comes from the viscera and the belly. So they are really mobilized to move forward. And that's another quality yet that they have. But as all other triads, they have their obstacles.
One note for those of you who are Myers-Briggs enthusiasts who might be new to the Enneagram is that you can actually be an intuitive type and still be in this triad. So as we talk about the body types, and then in the future podcasts, we're going to talk about heart types and then head types. There's not a one-to-one correlation between the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs. Like, take, for example, I'm a thinker in the Myers-Briggs system, but I'm in the heart center of intelligence. So one thing
I'm
that...
a feeler in the head,
exactly,
as an example.
Exactly. So just to make a little note, there isn't a one-to-one correlation here. As Uranio is talking about that visceral piece, the part that comes from the belly and the knowing, you can be an intuitive and still have these sensory, the sensory information as a priority in your life, as something that is a filter for you. So I just want to make a little note on that. But let's go into some, you talked about there's good things that come from this center of intelligence, but there's also some common challenges or obstacles that come from that. Can you talk a little bit about what is positive beyond what you just mentioned, Uranio, that is a benefit that comes from having the center of intelligence, and then some of the challenges that a person in this center might experience in their life?
So I think that body types can be very grounded in their body. Now, it's important to know that just because you're a body type doesn't necessarily mean you're fully in touch with your body in a healthy way. Again, all of these centers, there is a kind of a upside and a downside. There's a way that it can contribute to positive qualities and capabilities, but also we can be unconscious in different ways in these centers. But in terms of what qualities these body types tend to have, they tend to be more grounded in their body. They tend to be more in touch with their physical nature. They tend to get information through the five senses. They tend to have a good gut sense of things or a gut knowing about things. You'll hear body types say things like, I just know that this is the right way to go, or I just kind of had this sensation that this would be the right thing to do. They can be very committed. They tend to be good at process and structure, at implementing things, at making things happen, at taking control of things and moving things forward in practical ways. Those are all sort of some of the positives that might be associated with someone who's centered in the body.
Does that mean that they deal with less self-doubt?
I don't think they deal with a little less self-doubt, but that doesn't mean that they don't question things, both that come from themselves or from others. But it's more like trying to do the right thing instead of not feeling that they are capable. So self-doubt is actually a little more common for head types, in my view. Although you can see similar things on heart types and body types.
So then what are some of the common obstacles that people in the center of intelligence experience?
So one of the things that can be challenging for body types is that this triad of types is sometimes referred to as the triad of self-forgetting. And that means, again, a little bit in a paradoxical way, although they tend to be more grounded in their physical bodies, they can also be out of touch with the needs, the healthy needs of their physical bodies. So they can work hard without regard to their physical limitations or their self-care needs in a way. They can not always be fully in touch with how they feel or what they may need to do for themselves, because there's a little bit of a way that they tune out to themselves and forget some of their needs. Now, another really important thing about these three types is they are all associated with the core emotion of anger. And so they each are shaped in fundamental ways by the way they experience and express and relate to their anger. In each of the triads of types, one type overdoes that emotion. They kind of live maybe in it too much. One type underdoes it. They're not very in touch with it, sometimes not at all. The third type is kind of in the middle, more in touch with it, but also almost in conflict with it, like trying not to be in touch with it. And in this case, type 8 is the type that overdoes anger. Type 9 underdoes it, sort of isn't aware of it often, but it leaks out in passive forms. And then the 1 is kind of in conflict with it, aware of their anger more of the time, but almost don't relate to being angry. They relate more to being resentful or irritated because they put a lid on it. And so they're a little bit like having an inner conflict around anger. And so that's another obstacle that each of these types can have, is unconscious ways they relate to their own anger that can create problems in their life until they become more conscious of it.
I have 2 questions that have bubbled up. If this goes too conceptual, let me know. The first one is that you talked about this paradoxical relationship that it's called the triad of self-forgetting. Is the reason why self-care needs, even though they're body types and more in touch with that, is one of the reasons why it gets sidelined or not as focused on at times, is because of that insistence on doing the right thing, almost like deprioritizing the self. And whatever is the right thing, right? And I put that in italics in my mind, but whatever's the right thing takes high priority. And so needs might be on their radar, but then they're highly deprioritized because the right thing might be taking more precedence over that.
Yeah, I think you have a good point there, Antonia. And the way I would explain that in Enneagram terms is that they go very quickly into action and they get into an autopilot very easily, meaning that they engage in mechanical action that makes them just keep going. And by the way, it's hard to stop them. Sometimes for 9s, one of the 3 types there, it's hard to start also, but not for the other 2. But what is common for all of them is that it's hard to stop them. And that means that when they are in this autopilot, they are not really paying attention to other things, including what their own priorities are or needs. And, so the self-forgetting has a little bit to do with the fact that the instinctual energy, which is the main one for body types, has kidnapped both the emotional and the mental energies. The teaching here for all of us, regardless of type, is that we're 3-brained beings. And if we are not using all 3 centers of intelligence, we are not using all our potential. Coming back a bit more to what B said about anger, which is super important to understand about body types, I'd say that one challenge or obstacle that comes from this to these types, the body types, is that they judge a lot, both themselves and others. There's a constant tendency to be in judgmental mode. And that is something they need to learn how to stop. So acceptance in general is a challenge. And that can be solved when they get more access to the heart. Now, also in connection to that, they need to digest things because they're constantly feeling bothered, annoyed, or irritated by things. Some of them show that clearly, some don't, but they are always having this inner experience of having to digest things. And that this is an obstacle because it might lead to irritation or stubbornness when it's acted out.
So I always think of anger as, and I think I've read this or heard this someplace, as the emotional response when you don't have control over a situation. Like anger is when you don't have control and you don't like how the outcome is shaping up. So there's this instinct for the right thing, whatever. I'm sure that's individual, right? Whatever the right thing is probably emergent of the individual's values or whatever strikes them. But they don't necessarily, or a person in this center of intelligence wouldn't always feel like they have control over ensuring that the right thing is happening. And so then anger becomes the emergent. And you're saying that the key to this, or if I'm hearing you right, the key to this is to not focus so much on whatever that instinct is telling you, that there are other elements of intelligence that can be brought in, which is like the heart, right? Maybe being a little bit more generous in the opinion of others and kind of understanding the context a little bit better. And you just use the word digest, which makes me think of thought, going through and sort of thinking it through as opposed to just defaulting to whatever the instinct is.
No, in the digest thing, it's really an instinctual belly-based thing, like ruminating.
Okay.
They need to swallow something.
Like physical digestion is what he's talking about.
So that's not calling on that center of intelligence of thought. That's like the mechanics of what somebody in this triad needs to do, is they like almost on a metaphoric level, like truly digest what's happening as opposed to letting it sit in the pit of your stomach, metaphorically speaking, and just, rancify. I
do think that the anger of the body types has to do with control. I think it's a little bit more than that, but definitely that I would say is a core of it. Sometimes we say that they don't like to be told what to do. They're sensitive to wanting to sort of do it their way. Although nines can do things too much other people's way and not know sometimes what their own way is, unless they're kind of in the mode of supporting other people. There is an element of control and that I think anger is related to, but I also think anger is connected to boundaries. It's connected to being able to voice what's important to us in the world, what our priorities are, what we think is right, what we value, as you indicated. So I think it's definitely related to control and having control or wanting to have control or not having control. But I think it's also related to those other things as well.
So part of it is like a sense of sovereignty or autonomy as well, not necessarily needing to control the outer environment, but not to be controlled.
I think the word autonomy is a really good one.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
There's this sense of, when you talk about the right thing, is it, for people in this center, is it this sense that like they just instinctively know what's right? They just have an instinct for it. And they trust that instinct, maybe sometimes overly so, or maybe they should trust that instinct, but maybe not put so much weight on how other people should be responding, like everybody should be getting in line around or coalescing around what they think is the right thing to do. So I could see how that could create obstacles, but I could also see how that would be a strength. Having that trust in what your gut is telling you is important. So what's the best relationship somebody in the center of intelligence would have? Like, should they be trusting that gut instinct of what's right? Or should they be putting it on ice for a minute? Like, what's the best way to interact with this that creates the fewest obstacles with this just knowing sense?
That's a very good question. Thank you also for asking all these good questions, Antonia, actually. And what I think is super useful for body types when they learn more about the Enneagram is to understand some unconscious tendencies. And we're talking about one of them right here, right now, with your question. The tendency to think in black and white and seeing the right or wrong and believing that there is only one right thing, ease, moved by anger in the inside, and a tendency to be really in charge of what will happen. So be a bit bossy in this sense, although sometimes some of the types in the triad might not look bossy at first, but they are in charge in other ways, for instance, with passive aggression. So the thing here is not even questioning if they are right or wrong, but questioning the mindset of believing that there is only one way to go. And as a consequence, they might have problems in relationships. People might feel them not only as trying to get control over things, but also being controlling of them. Also, they are sometimes seen as being inflexible. And the thing is, sometimes they have an intuition that points out to a certain direction or something that's happening, which is brilliant. But in other times, they think that's happening, or they trust too much that that is happening. But what they're really trying to do is to impose their own view onto someone else. So it's tricky. And sometimes the body types do not look back and examine whether their gut feelings were right or not. They change opinions. So it's also funny because these body types are the ones that are most concerned with fairness, which is something that comes from the belly, from the viscera. However, they always risk being unfair when they come up with one right way, and directly or not, they impose this onto others.
What happens to somebody in this center of intelligence when they learn the art of not questioning whether or not they've got the right take, but questioning that there is more than one right take? Like, what ends up being the response to that, like the psychological response to going, oh, I might only have one slice of the pie?
As with many of the types or all things in the Enneagram, when we're using it as a growth tool, the key is making unconscious tendencies more conscious. And when we start observing ourselves and getting really clear on what our default tendencies are, what we realize is often, as exactly in the way we're talking about it, there's an upside and a downside. There's something really positive and functional about some of these tendencies, but especially when they're unconscious or not fully conscious, they get us into trouble because we tend to overdo them. So for instance, yes, all three body types can often say, like, I just have a gut sense of what the right thing is. And they'll even talk about how sometimes when they've had a gut sense, it's hard to describe to other people why they just have a sense of what the right thing to do is. And especially the rest of us can be more heady. And so we can want explanations. And sometimes it's hard to put into words because it's the language of the body. And we also hear them say sometimes if they don't act on these gut instincts, they go the wrong way. That if they don't listen to them and the wisdom that comes from their gut instincts, that can be a problem. However, exactly as Uranio just said, there's a way that when these tendencies are unconscious, or when our gut feelings or our gut senses are embedded in our personality, which is by definition operating at only a certain level of awareness, they can go the wrong way. They can go the wrong way in a couple of different ways. One is sort of force your right way on others, or become rigid around, no, it has to be this way, or I can't see other ways as being potentially equally right, or as other alternatives that need to be considered. Or they can be kind of out of touch with their gut instinct. They cannot assert it at times when it might be good to assert it, when it might be good to bring the wisdom that comes from that into the picture. So it can kind of go either way. They can be inflexible around it, or they can be like not in as much in touch with it, or not giving it enough credit in a way. And like, again, they each do it in three different ways. So for instance, nines are the types that can not give enough attention to their gut instincts, or they can act out passively or passive aggressively aggressively when they have the impression that other people aren't interested in their sense of what the right way is to do something.
I really like what you're saying, B, but if I also may add one little piece here, I think, Antonia, that the same way that we mentioned that when body types overcome judgment of others and themselves, they are opening up access to the heart center, which is a second intelligence there. When they practice seeing other options, shades of gray in between the black and white, they are opening up access to the head center. So that is what's happening also with them. They are becoming mentally more intelligent, which has nothing to do with IQ. It has to do with flexibility, with seeing different scenarios, which is not really the forte for body types.
So I see in my head a timeline of point A, which is being unconscious around all of this, showing up with adaptive behaviors and mindsets and sort of being unconscious and unaware of all of this, but it's still manifesting in your life all the time. And then I see a moment on the timeline that you're talking about, which is overcoming the challenge, getting access to a heart center and a head center, which gives more flexibility and I'm assuming more compassion. But that first step on that timeline probably feels really wrong, which is questioning yourself, right? Like that first moment of like, oh, you mean like I have to question whether or not I'm right? I mean, I say this because I'm pretty sure that both my parents are in the gut triad or in the center of intelligence. And the inflexibility, I mean, they kind of reinforce each other's worst inflexible qualities. And kind of famously so on this podcast, I talk about my relationship with my parents all the time. And I could see that first step of being willing to question oneself and go, maybe I don't have a full picture here. Maybe there are other right ways of doing things, as just feeling really off. I could see that feeling just really wrong to them to even question it initially. So I'm assuming that when you know your specific type in the Enneagram, or, particularly in the center of intelligence, there's like a path to go, okay, that initial step of that feeling really wrong, that's not necessarily wrong in and of itself. There's like a whole path here to go toward where, at the end of this path is, like you mentioned, flexibility, access to, the heart center of intelligence, all these other things. What happens like right after that? Like that feeling of that's just wrong to even question. Is that something, do I have the right take on that? Do I have like sort of that's the first initial step that makes it really hard to go down these paths?
Actually, we need to think here, what is the objective of the person when studying all this and doing inner work? If we are coming from a perspective of being functional in life and having success and, make things happen, then it's not much of a problem actually to work from one of those three centers, and people become very competent with that dominant center of intelligence, and they can be quite successful, and not only body types, but also heart and head types. However, if the objective is true psycho-spiritual growth, that is something else that requires that the person develops the other two centers of intelligence. There is no way that a person can get to higher states of consciousness without having access to all three centers. And when we talk, for instance, about presence, which is in very simplistic terms, which is being in touch with the whole body and sensing that the body is connected to the earth and connected to the environment around us, that requires that we first open up access to all three centers.
I do think that exactly as Uranio is saying, sort of the end goal is to be in touch with all three centers, including the one you're based in even more fully. I do think that the first step is recognizing more and more clearly and more consciously that when you're coming from your default mode, which is sort of your personality's perspective on the world and experience of the world, you're not seeing the full picture. You're not operating based on an understanding of the whole. It's like you're seeing 360 degrees of reality through a relatively narrow slice. And if we're talking about centers, we might say a third of what's possible to see. So it might feel uncomfortable for a body type to consider, well, maybe my way of seeing this isn't the only way of experiencing it. And I need to add in, say, connecting with others, which is what the heart types are really good at, and seeing their perspectives on things and letting that inform my sense of the right thing. But also seeing multiple scenarios and being able to, see different mental models about how things could happen, which is what the head types are good at. And so I think the first step is almost a recognition that I need to broaden the scope of my perspective. I need to recognize that I may be only seeing and reacting from a limited awareness or a limited set of capacities. And yes, I think for all types, for everyone, when we make that recognition that, wait a minute, I need to notice that I'm operating on autopilot, and this is maybe more mechanical or more limited than what the full picture is that I need to consult. I think it's uncomfortable for all of us, and it might feel wrong, but I would say it's more of a feeling of discomfort and resistance that comes up in all of us when we question our main defensive mode of being, partly because that's what's helped us stay safe. That's what's helped us survive. That's what's helped us be functional in the world. And so questioning your main mode of operation is uncomfortable. But if you're having this perspective, which the Enneagram gives you, is yes, you have one piece of the puzzle. You have one approach to the way that you see things and operate, but you need to widen out your perspective and recognize that even if your gut sense is right in a given situation, there may be other things that are also right. And that if you connect with others and you develop your ability to be more flexible and see things in different ways, then your sense of things is going to be part of a larger mosaic. And you're not just going to be kind of doing things in a more rote, less conscious way.
I think that's a really good distinction, this difference between something feeling wrong versus feeling uncomfortable. Because I was thinking, as we were talking about it, I'm like, man, these people in the center of intelligence have maybe a bigger obstacle than other types, because they're going to have to go against that instinct of, knowing what the right thing is. And they're going to have to feel like the path of psychospiritual growth, which I think is a fantastic phrase, Uranio, is going to feel wrong to them. So they're going to have to go contrary to this instinct. But that's not an obstacle to growth, because it's not that they're feeling wrong and have to not listen to that inner voice. It's that they might feel uncomfortable and then stretch out of their comfort zone in order to go down one of these paths of growth. But what I'm hearing you say is that in Jung circles, like in our circles, Jung called it one-sidedness, and we talk a lot about that in Myers-Briggs terms. Basically, it's a willingness to get out of one-sidedness, even if, as you mentioned, Uranio, that one-sidedness may have come with some advantages. The doing and the building life around that. There's always that moment when you hit a law of diminishing returns where you go, I don't think this strategy is working anymore. I think there might be something more that I need to tap into.
Yeah, I really like what both of you said, really. And what I think, Antonia, is that when it comes to psycho-spiritual development, we need to develop humility and a sense that we are not as important we thought we were. Like we are limited human beings. So what happens with any person who's allowing that one intelligence dominate the whole picture is that these people become too sure of themselves, and they think that their dominant intelligence is better than the dominant intelligence of someone else. So if people want to grow towards humility, they need to be able to focus on the things that they not yet are in touch with. So that is a more conceptual thing. I know. I hope what I said was not too complex, but it's quite an important thing in the Enneagram's philosophy and intention.
So maybe it would be helpful if we summarized some of the main obstacles or challenges that the body types can face. And maybe I'll start, and then Uranio, you can fill in anything that I miss. First of all, getting even more in touch with the body in a way that goes against a kind of unconscious tendency to self-forget. Being more grounded in the body in a positive way, feeling the energy in your body, really embracing the kind of wisdom of the body and the gut knowing, and also listening to the body in terms of what it needs and how you need to take care of it in conscious ways. And then I think dealing with anger is a big one. So each of the three body types has different challenges having to do with anger, but it's a lot about, again, getting really conscious of anger and how you feel it and channel it and express it, because there are positive uses of anger and, of course, not so positive uses of anger. And there are unconscious tendencies of the ways anger gets acted out with these three types. And it's all about being more conscious of how they're experiencing anger and how they choose to express it. And then I would say not being fully in touch with emotions or the thinking function. It's sort of being more in one of the centers than the other two. So developing the other two centers so that you're taking more full account of emotions and your ability to see multiple scenarios or analyze things in a more conscious way. Then also noticing how you can have a tendency to move too quickly into action or not quickly enough or not ever move into action. So noticing the tendencies around that movement forward or not being able to get moving, depending on which type you are.
I think you did an amazing summary, B, and I would add just that it's a lot about flexibility. And it's also flexibility in a body-based way. So it's like being less tense and more going with the flow of things. And also then after really being in the body and touching that body wisdom, there is a challenge to go beyond it towards the heart and the head.
And I would just add one thing is, although I totally agree with you that it's about creating more flexibility, seeing a wider picture. There's one of the three body types that can be too flexible. And this is the nice thing about the Enneagram is everything comes in threes. And often one of those threes is a little bit the opposite of the other two. And so for nines, for instance, it's about noticing how they can be too flexible. And sometimes they need to take a stand or be a little bit less flexible. So again, a lot of these things come in polarities. You can do too much or not enough. And so it's finding a balance, I think, of these things.
Yeah, and in the case of type 9 that you're bringing up, it's paradoxical, right? Because they are indeed very flexible in the outside and with people and so on, but deep inside they are not. They are judgmental. They think there is one way to go, and they are getting unhappy, but they don't face conflicts. They don't like to say no, and that adds to a lot of contained anger.
So a person is listening to this. We have got the listener who might be identifying some of these characteristics or challenges and obstacles. What are the action steps a person can take to go further down this rabbit hole?
Well, I think the first thing is to locate their type and subtype, which adds in the instinctual level of the personality. And once you find your type, often that's a huge growth step right there, because you learn so much about yourself so quickly. And there are various ways of locating your type. But after you locate your type, then the beauty of the Enneagram is it sets out a series of growth steps very clearly for you associated with your type, depending on what center you are, what your type patterns are, what your subtype patterns are, which give even more specific things for you to focus on. And it's a lot about just following the steps outlined in, reading one of our books or listening to podcasts or finding really good authoritative materials and really seeing what the growth path is for you.
Okay, we're going to need to stop there. Thank you both for being here this week on the show. We're going to talk about the other two centers of intelligence on future podcasts, so we're going to invite you back to talk about those. So if you didn't get to your center of intelligence on this show, stay tuned because yours is coming next. One of the resources I'd like to direct people to is the book you both have written together. And it's out now at all major book retailers. Would you just give us the title and a little bit more about this book for people that want to go further?
Yes, it's called The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up. And the subtitle is Find Your Path, Face Your Shadow, Discover Your True Self. And it's an introductory book, but instead of just describing the 9 types, it really sets out a 3-step growth path for each one of the 9 types. So you learn about your type as you're learning about exactly what your growth path is. First, identifying some of the patterns associated with your type that tend to be more conscious, that you can kind of see, oh yeah, I tend to do this all the time. Oh, there I go again. But then looking deeper at some of the more unconscious patterns that tend to be blind spots, or in what Jung called the shadow, and really working to make those more conscious. Sometimes that involves feeling some of the pain that you may have buried, that your personality defenses are set up to keep you from feeling. And then knowing what you can aspire to, knowing a little bit about the high side of what's waiting for you in a positive sense once you face your shadow and work through some of your less conscious patterns and develop more flexibility.
So their book is available now at all major book retailers, but probably the best place to go is your website. Would you guys give us your website address to direct everyone to find out more about what you do, and then find the link to the book and other resources you have?
So yes, sure. Our website is cpenneagram.com. We are the Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy. And also, Joe, I would like to mention that we also have our podcast, which is called Enneagram 2.0.
Fantastic. So we just give you a bunch of resources to check out if you're interested in going further down this rabbit hole. We also have produced Enneagram starter kits here at Personality Hacker with you both. You both are highlighted and featured as our guest presenters on those programs, and you basically go into each of the 9 Enneagram types. So if someone's a type, they would get a starter kit for their specific type, and it goes into all sorts of things like defining the type. It goes into that center of intelligence that we talked about. It talks about the passions of the type, the fixations. It goes into subtypes. I mean, key tendencies, blind spots, growth path, all of the things you need to know for your personality type, your Enneagram personality type, and the growth path forward for you and how you're uniquely wired. And Beatrice and Uranio guide us through this experience for your type. So here at Personality Hacker, you can go to our website and find the specific starter kit for your type as well. I'd encourage you to do that. Thanks to both of you for being on the show with us this week.
It's always good to talk with you guys.
It is. And thanks for all the work you've been doing. Wonderful work on Personality Hacker.
Well, we look forward to talking to you on the next episode. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can leave a rating and review for us on iTunes. That helps us out a lot. And when you go check out our suite of programs at personalityhacker.com, make sure you go check out those Enneagram starter kits. Again, they are taught by Beatrice and Uranio, and they are amazing. So go check out your type and invest in yourself and your growth path to help transcend your ego and make the unconscious conscious.
My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.